The young medical worker had always dreamed of making a difference in people's lives. Fresh out of training, he had landed a job in a private hospital known for caring for both ordinary patients and those who were extremely wealthy. He worked hard, often taking extra shifts, and his cheerful attitude made him popular among colleagues. Yet he knew that the real test of his patience and dedication was still ahead. One morning, he was called into the office of the head nurse. She looked at him with a serious expression and said that he was being assigned a very special case. A millionaire had been in a coma for several weeks after a sudden illness, and the hospital staff needed someone compassionate and patient to care for him daily. Most of the regular staff avoided the task, seeing it as unpleasant and tiring. The young worker hesitated for a moment, feeling nervous, but he didn't want to refuse. He knew this could be the most important job of his life. As he walked toward the private room where the millionaire lay, he felt a mix of excitement and fear. The room was large, with expensive furniture, medical machines beeping softly, and sunlight streaming through wide windows. The millionaire was lying on a hospital bed, pale and still, covered by crisp white sheets. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, keeping track of his vital signs. To most people, he looked lifeless, but the young worker reminded himself that beneath the surface, he was still a human being who deserved care and respect. His first task was simple but intimate: bathing the patient. It was not something everyone wanted to do, especially someone so powerful and wealthy. He prepared the warm water, soft cloths, and gentle soap, making sure everything was comfortable. He spoke softly as he approached, introducing himself in a calm, friendly tone, even though he knew the patient might not respond. He had learned early in his training that people in a coma could sometimes sense kindness, even without opening their eyes. As he bathed the millionaire, he noticed small details: the way his skin was dry in some places, the tension in his hands, the faint lines on his face that told a story of years of success and struggle. The young worker treated him with patience and respect, careful not to rush, and made sure every movement was gentle. He talked quietly, telling the patient about the morning outside, the weather, and even small, ordinary things. He hoped that these words, though they might seem simple, could reach him in some way. Days passed, and the young worker settled into a routine. Each morning he would arrive early, check the patient's vitals, and spend time cleaning, feeding, and repositioning him to prevent bed sores. He would play soft music in the background and sometimes read passages from books that he thought might be comforting. Though the millionaire remained silent, he felt a growing connection, a sense that his efforts were not entirely in vain. There were tiny signs, a slight twitch of a finger, a soft change in breathing, that suggested the patient might be aware of his presence. Colleagues often stopped by the room and made comments. Some laughed quietly, saying that the young worker was wasting his time, that the millionaire would never wake up. Others were more sympathetic but didn't want to take the time to be involved themselves. The young worker ignored them. He focused on the person in front of him, not the wealth or power they represented, but the human being who needed care. He remembered the lessons from his training. Dignity, empathy, and patience could sometimes achieve what medicine alone could not. Family visits added another layer of challenge. The millionaire's relatives were anxious and impatient, constantly asking for updates and expressing frustration that progress seemed slow. Some criticized the staff, questioning whether anyone was truly doing enough. The young worker, however, remained calm and professional. He explained the daily care routines carefully, offered small reassurances, and made sure to document everything meticulously. He understood their concern, but he also knew that true healing could not be rushed. Evenings were often the hardest. The young worker sometimes stayed later than required, quietly checking the patient one last time before leaving. He would adjust the blankets, wipe a forehead, and whisper words of encouragement. It was during these quiet moments that he felt the most connected to the millionaire. He imagined the stories behind the closed eyes, the life of someone who had built wealth and faced challenges, and he respected that journey. It reminded him why he had chosen this profession. Not for recognition or reward, but for moments like this, where simple acts of care could matter deeply. Slowly, the young worker began noticing patterns. Certain songs seemed to relax the patient, and gentle conversation sometimes caused subtle changes in breathing. He recorded these observations meticulously, sharing insights with doctors and nurses who were intrigued. Even though the patient could not speak or respond directly, his presence seemed to influence his recovery in small ways. The young worker felt a mix of hope and humility, realizing that his role, though quiet and unseen by many, was essential. Word of the young worker's dedication began to spread. Other staff members who once dismissed him now watched with quiet admiration. Some offered advice while others simply observed in silence. Despite the attention, he remained focused on the daily tasks: bathing, feeding, repositioning, and talking. Every action was performed with care, respect, and a steady patience that came from his belief in the human capacity to respond to kindness, even in the most dire circumstances. One afternoon, a small miracle occurred. The young worker was adjusting the blankets when he noticed the millionaire's hand twitch ever so slightly. He froze, unsure if it was real or imagined. Slowly, he reached out and held the hand, speaking softly. The hand moved again, this time more noticeably. His heart raced. Could it be a sign that the patient was aware? He did not want to alarm anyone or jump to conclusions, but he felt a deep sense of validation. His daily care, his words, and his patience might be reaching the person inside. From that moment, the young worker's determination strengthened. He continued his routines with even more mindfulness, aware that every gentle touch, every kind word could make a difference. He spoke about ordinary things, like the way sunlight fell on the hospital floor or the chirping of birds outside. He told stories of people he had met, moments that brought a smile to his own face. He imagined that the millionaire, somewhere in the depths of his mind, might sense these stories, these expressions of human warmth and hope. Days turned into weeks, and the young worker rarely missed a day. Friends and colleagues asked if it was tiring, if he ever wanted a break. He would smile and shake his head, explaining that it was not work in the usual sense. It was a chance to connect, to care, to make a human being feel less alone. He often thought about the irony. A man who had so much in life now relied entirely on someone who had so little in terms of material wealth, yet so much in compassion. Late one evening, after a long day, the young worker sat by the bedside, adjusting the pillows and smoothing the sheets. He watched the millionaire's face, noticing subtle changes in expression, the slight rise and fall of the chest, the faint warmth of the skin. He whispered softly, telling the patient about his own day, sharing a small, funny story, hoping that somehow it would reach him. In that quiet room filled with beeping machines and the faint scent of antiseptic, there was a sense of calm, a fragile yet growing connection between two people from completely different worlds. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if the millionaire would ever wake up. But in his heart he felt a quiet confidence that kindness, patience, and genuine care could make a difference. And every morning, he returned to the room with the same dedication, ready to bathe, feed, and speak to the man who, though unresponsive, had already begun to teach him the true meaning of compassion. The young medical worker's days were long and filled with challenges, yet he embraced each one. With every task completed, every gentle word spoken, he built a bridge of trust and empathy. The millionaire, lying in silence, was slowly becoming a part of that bridge, whether he realized it or not. And the young worker, through his unwavering dedication, was discovering the extraordinary impact of simple human kindness. The young medical worker had settled into a steady rhythm with his daily duties. Each morning he arrived early, washing his hands thoroughly before stepping into the room where the millionaire lay. The quiet hum of the machines and the gentle sunlight falling across the floor created a peaceful atmosphere, one that seemed almost sacred in its stillness. He greeted the patient softly, calling him by his name even though he knew there might be no response. To the young worker, the words mattered more than the answer. They were an expression of care and a reminder that he was not alone. The days were long and often exhausting, but he did not falter. He would spend hours bathing the millionaire, speaking gently, and attending to every need with patience. He noticed small details that others might overlook: the dryness of the skin, the position of the hands, the tension in the shoulders. Each adjustment, each touch was deliberate and filled with respect. The young worker believed that even without conscious awareness, the patient could feel the difference between hurried care and thoughtful attention. Over time, he began observing subtle responses. A finger would twitch, a brow would furrow, a slight change in breathing would occur. These tiny movements encouraged him to keep going, reminding him that his presence mattered. Some days were harder than others. The millionaire's body was weak, and there were moments when it seemed nothing would change. The young worker felt the weight of responsibility, but he refused to let doubt overshadow his hope. He reminded himself that healing was not always visible immediately. Sometimes it was the quiet consistency of care that made the most profound difference. His colleagues often stopped by the room, some curious, others skeptical. They watched the young worker move with care, speaking softly and never rushing. Some whispered that he was too invested, that he would never see results. Others, more quietly, admired his patience and dedication. He never reacted to their opinions. He focused only on the patient. To him, the millionaire was not just a wealthy man or a medical case. He was a human being who deserved dignity, respect, and gentle care. The family visits were both challenging and revealing. The millionaire's relatives were anxious, impatient, and sometimes harsh. They questioned the young worker about progress, fretted over every small change, and occasionally expressed frustration with the hospital staff. Despite their pressure, the young worker remained calm. He explained each part of the care routine with clarity, demonstrating the attention and thoughtfulness he gave to their loved one. He offered reassurance without making promises, acknowledging their worries while maintaining his focus on the patient's needs. In the quiet moments, when the family had left, the young worker would linger by the bedside. He would adjust pillows, smooth sheets, and ensure the patient was comfortable. Sometimes he would hum softly or tell short stories about ordinary things: a bird outside the window, a funny incident from his own day, a memory that brought a smile. He believed that even in the depths of a coma, these gentle sounds and human expressions might reach the millionaire in some form. He imagined that somewhere beneath the stillness, the patient could sense care, empathy, and kindness. The young medical worker began noticing patterns in the patient's responses. Certain songs seemed to relax him, while soft conversation prompted subtle changes in breathing. He kept detailed notes, sharing his observations with the attending doctors. Some were intrigued, others skeptical, but all could see the dedication and meticulousness in his approach. The young worker did not seek recognition. He was motivated by the knowledge that his presence mattered, even if only in small, imperceptible ways. One afternoon, he introduced a new routine. He started playing gentle classical music while speaking softly about the world outside the room. He told stories of ordinary people, of small acts of kindness, of moments that made life beautiful. He described the warmth of the sun on his face, the laughter of children playing nearby, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street. He watched the patient carefully, noticing slight movements, subtle changes in expression, and minor shifts in breathing. These small signs fueled his determination, reminding him that connection was possible even in the most silent situations. There were moments of exhaustion and doubt. Some nights he went home feeling drained, questioning whether his efforts truly mattered. Yet each morning he returned without hesitation. He reminded himself that consistency was essential, and that even when it seemed invisible, human care had the power to make a difference. He held on to the belief that every gentle touch, every kind word was a seed of hope that might one day bloom. The millionaire's family began noticing the young worker's dedication. While initially critical or indifferent, they slowly started to respect the care he provided. They would occasionally ask questions about routines, sometimes seeking guidance on how to help when they were present. The young worker offered small suggestions, always with patience and humility. Over time, a quiet trust developed. Though they could not see immediate results, they recognized the commitment and humanity in his actions. Small miracles continued to emerge. One evening, while adjusting the patient's blankets, the young worker noticed a subtle movement, a slight raise of a hand, the twitch of a finger. He froze, careful not to startle anyone. Slowly he held the hand, speaking softly and encouragingly. The movement repeated, more pronounced this time. He felt a surge of hope and a deep sense of validation. His dedication, patience, and empathy were reaching the patient in ways he had only imagined. Encouraged, he continued to refine his routines. He paid closer attention to timing, voice tone, and the patient's reactions. He experimented with different songs, soft lighting, and gentle touch techniques. Each day became a learning experience, a careful observation of what might evoke a response, a subtle sign that progress was possible. The young worker remained humble, aware that these signs were small but meaningful, and that every effort contributed to a growing connection. Colleagues began to treat him differently. Those who once whispered doubt now observed quietly, some even offering advice or encouragement. He remained focused, however, never allowing external opinions to distract him. His motivation was simple: care and compassion. He knew that in moments of quiet patience, profound changes could take root, even when unseen. Family visits remained emotionally complex. The millionaire's relatives sometimes expressed frustration or anxiety, struggling to maintain hope. The young worker listened patiently, offering explanations and reassurance. He understood their emotions and empathized with their fears, yet he never let their impatience affect the quality of his care. He maintained a calm presence, demonstrating through action that consistency, patience, and kindness were invaluable. Evenings were often solitary and reflective. The young worker would sit quietly by the bedside after completing all tasks, observing the patient, listening to the soft rhythm of breathing, and noting small signs of responsiveness. He would whisper stories, hum gentle tunes, and speak softly about the ordinary wonders of life. In these moments, he felt a profound connection, a silent communication that transcended words and actions. Over weeks, the young worker's dedication became a source of quiet inspiration. He had transformed the daily routine into a ritual of care, empathy, and connection. Every bath, every conversation, every gentle touch was imbued with meaning. The millionaire, though still unresponsive to the outside world, seemed to react in subtle ways, reinforcing the belief that human presence, patience, and kindness could reach even the most distant consciousness. Through all of this, the young worker grew personally as well. He developed a deeper understanding of empathy, patience, and the power of human connection. He realized that true healing was not only physical but emotional and spiritual. He discovered that even when results were not immediately visible, consistent, compassionate care could leave a lasting impact. One evening, while adjusting the pillows and smoothing the sheets, the young worker paused and looked at the patient. He whispered softly, telling a story about a small bird that had built a nest outside the window. He described how the bird had struggled but eventually succeeded, finding warmth and safety. He smiled gently, imagining that the patient could sense the care, the hope, and the human presence behind his words. Though he could not predict the future, the young worker held on to quiet confidence. He knew that his role was important, that every act of care contributed to something larger than himself. He continued each day with unwavering dedication, believing that the combination of patience, empathy, and human connection could create moments of healing and even transformation. And in the stillness of the room, amidst the quiet hum of machines and the faint warmth of sunlight, he nurtured hope, compassion, and a bond that transcended words. The young medical worker had been caring for the millionaire for several weeks, and the routine had become second nature to him. Every day he approached the room with the same calm and focused mindset, ready to bathe, feed, and speak to the patient. Yet the work was never mechanical. Each day brought its own challenges, emotions, and small discoveries. He had learned to read the slightest changes, the twitch of a finger, the deepening of a breath, a subtle shift in expression. These tiny signals were more meaningful to him than words, proof that his presence mattered in ways others could not always see. One morning, as he prepared the room, he noticed a slight change in the patient's breathing. The chest rose and fell more steadily, almost as if the patient was anticipating his touch. The young worker paused for a moment, a quiet thrill of hope running through him. He gently washed the patient, carefully attending to every detail, all the while speaking softly about the day ahead. He described the morning sunlight streaming through the hospital windows, the gentle sounds of birds outside, and the laughter of children playing nearby. His voice was calm, rhythmic, and filled with warmth, each word meant to comfort and reach the patient on some deep level. Over the next few days, the signs became more frequent. Fingers twitched more noticeably. Small smiles seemed to form, and there were subtle changes in posture. The young worker documented everything meticulously, sharing his observations with doctors who were increasingly intrigued. Some remained skeptical, but others began to see that this consistent patient care was producing results that medical equipment alone could not explain. The young worker never sought praise. He cared because he believed in the humanity of the act, in the quiet power of attention, compassion, and presence. There were moments of doubt, though. Not every day showed progress, and some setbacks were disheartening. One day, the patient's vital signs dropped slightly, causing concern among the staff. The young worker stayed by the bedside, calmly adjusting the pillows, checking the machines, and ensuring that the patient was comfortable. He spoke in a gentle, soothing tone as if reminding both himself and the patient that setbacks were part of the journey. He believed that patience, persistence, and unwavering care could help overcome even the most challenging obstacles. Family visits added a layer of complexity. The millionaire's relatives were anxious and emotional, sometimes expressing frustration at the slow pace of progress. They questioned the staff, demanding explanations and seeking assurances that the patient would recover. The young worker remained composed, answering questions honestly without offering false hope. He demonstrated the care he provided, showing the small but meaningful steps taken each day to maintain dignity, comfort, and connection. Gradually, the family began to trust him, recognizing his dedication and the quiet influence it had on the patient's subtle responses. Evenings were often the most reflective time for the young worker. After completing all necessary tasks, he would sit quietly by the patient's side, observing every movement, listening to the faint rhythm of breathing, and noting the tiny signals of life. He told stories about ordinary joys, small victories, and moments that brought warmth to his own life. He spoke of sunsets, laughter, kindness from strangers, and acts of courage in everyday life. Though the patient could not respond, the young worker believed that these words created a connection that transcended consciousness, a bridge built on empathy and patience. As weeks turned into months, the young worker's dedication began to produce more noticeable effects. The patient's fingers moved deliberately, his eyes flickered slightly, and small facial expressions suggested awareness. The staff took notice, some astonished, others cautiously optimistic. The young worker remained humble, understanding that recovery was slow and fragile and that each step, no matter how small, was meaningful. He continued his routines with unwavering care, fully aware that consistency and patience were essential to nurturing both body and spirit. There were days when exhaustion threatened to take over. The work was physically and emotionally demanding, and the young worker sometimes went home feeling drained. Yet he returned each morning with renewed determination. He reminded himself that his role was not just about completing tasks, but about offering a presence that was steady, kind, and empathetic. He understood that even when results were not immediately visible, the care he provided planted seeds of trust, comfort, and hope. Gradually, the millionaire's family began to appreciate the depth of the young worker's commitment. They started to observe the small improvements, the subtle signs of awareness, and the consistent attention given by someone who truly cared. Their initial impatience softened into gratitude and respect. They began to ask for guidance on how they could support the patient without causing stress or interruption. The young worker offered suggestions with patience and humility, emphasizing that even small gestures of compassion could contribute to recovery. During one quiet afternoon, a particularly notable moment occurred. The young worker was reading a short story aloud, describing the courage of a person facing a difficult challenge. As he spoke, he noticed the patient's eyes flutter slightly. The hands moved with more intentionality, and the breathing became steadier. The young worker held his breath, careful not to overreact, yet deeply encouraged by the visible signs. He continued reading and speaking, aware that these subtle connections were forming, that the patient might be aware on some level of the care, the attention, and the human warmth surrounding him. The young worker also found moments to reflect on his own growth. He realized that his experience with the patient had changed him profoundly. He had learned the importance of empathy, patience, and the power of simple human gestures. He understood that healing was not only about medicine, procedures, or interventions, but also about presence, connection, and consistent care. Every bath, every gentle touch, every word spoken with kindness was part of a larger process of nurturing life and hope. Challenges continued, as recovery was never linear. Some days brought frustration or slight regressions in the patient's responsiveness. Machines would beep, vitals would fluctuate, and the staff would consult urgently about the best steps to take. The young worker stayed calm, steady, and attentive, never allowing panic or frustration to dictate his actions. He continued to focus on the patient's comfort, safety, and subtle emotional cues, understanding that healing often progressed in invisible ways before becoming visible. The young worker also became more attuned to the environment of care. He noticed how lighting, sounds, and temperature could affect the patient's comfort. He adjusted blinds to soften sunlight, lowered background noise, and made small modifications to ensure a soothing atmosphere. He understood that recovery was holistic, influenced not just by medical procedures but by emotional and environmental factors. His attention to detail reflected a deep respect for the patient's dignity and humanity. Family dynamics remained delicate. At times, disagreements arose about the best course of action, causing tension and stress. The young worker navigated these moments with empathy and professionalism, listening to concerns, clarifying misunderstandings, and gently guiding the family to support the patient in meaningful ways. He demonstrated through example the importance of patience, care, and emotional support, showing that even in challenging circumstances, compassion could create stability and reassurance. One day, the patient responded in a way that surprised everyone. While adjusting the blanket, the young worker noticed a deliberate movement of the hand toward his own. He held it gently, speaking softly and encouragingly. The hand moved again, and for the first time the eyes seemed to track his movements slightly. The staff who witnessed this were astonished, realizing that consistent care and human presence had created a tangible impact. The young worker remained calm, quietly noting the progress and reinforcing the connection through gentle touch and words. Encouraged by this development, the young worker continued refining his routines. He spoke with more confidence, describing the world outside, sharing stories of everyday kindness and gently encouraging small movements. Each day brought subtle progress, and he documented every change meticulously. The patient's family began to sense a difference, their worry softening into hope and gratitude. The young worker's quiet dedication had not only reached the patient but had also begun to influence those around him, creating an atmosphere of optimism and care. In the evenings, he often stayed longer, reflecting on the journey. He thought about the contrast between the millionaire's world of wealth and influence and his own modest beginnings, recognizing that true value lay not in money but in empathy, patience, and human connection. The room, once a place of silence and uncertainty, had become a space where subtle communication, trust, and compassion thrived. Each day, the young worker reinforced these connections, nurturing the patient's body and spirit with unwavering care. As weeks continued to pass, small gestures became more meaningful. The patient's fingers moved more deliberately. Subtle smiles appeared, and occasional eye movements suggested growing awareness. The young worker's meticulous attention, gentle touch, and consistent presence had created a foundation for recovery. He remained humble, understanding that progress was fragile and required continued patience, care, and emotional investment. Through every challenge, doubt, and moment of uncertainty, the young worker never wavered. He believed in the power of human connection, the quiet influence of empathy, and the ability of consistent patient care to reach even those who seemed unreachable. Each day he nurtured hope, reinforced dignity, and offered presence, knowing that these simple acts could create profound change. And in the stillness of the room, amid the soft beeping of machines and the faint warmth of sunlight, a bond was growing, a bond between caregiver and patient. Grounded in the young medical worker had been caring for the millionaire for months now, and the quiet bond between them had grown in ways few could see. Each day he arrived with the same dedication, the same calm energy, and the same quiet belief that his presence mattered. The routine was familiar but never mundane, because each day brought subtle signs of life, small gestures that hinted at awareness, and the possibility that his patient could feel the care, even without fully responding. One morning, as he entered the room, he noticed a difference immediately. The millionaire's hand was resting lightly on the sheet, slightly raised as if reaching for comfort or connection. The young worker's heart leapt, but he did not rush. He approached calmly, speaking softly, explaining what he would do and offering reassurance through words and gentle touch. He began the daily bath, moving slowly and deliberately, mindful of every motion, every sensation. His voice was low, steady, and warm, sharing stories from outside the hospital, about the world, about small acts of kindness that he had witnessed. As he washed and tended to the patient, he noticed more signs. A brow lifted slightly, an eyelid twitched, and for the first time in weeks a small smile appeared. The young worker froze for a moment, careful not to disturb the fragile progress, and continued speaking softly. Each word, each gentle touch was a message of presence and compassion. He continued the routine, fully aware that this could be the moment where patience and care might finally meet recognition. The family had grown increasingly anxious and hopeful. They visited more frequently now, noticing changes that were once invisible. The young worker welcomed them, showing them how to support the patient without disrupting the care he provided. He explained small signs to watch for, emphasizing the importance of calm, consistent presence over frantic worry. The family began to see the impact of his dedication, realizing that the young medical worker had created a connection that went beyond treatment, beyond wealth or influence. Days passed, each one marked by tiny but meaningful gestures. The patient's eyes began to follow movement more clearly. Hands moved with intention, and subtle expressions suggested awareness and recognition. The young worker's heart was filled with hope, yet he remained composed, understanding the fragility of recovery. He continued to speak softly, describing life outside the hospital, sharing small stories of courage, kindness, and ordinary beauty. He played gentle music, adjusted lighting for comfort, and maintained a calm, soothing atmosphere. Every detail mattered, and he attended to each one with care and empathy. One afternoon, as he adjusted the pillows and checked the monitors, the millionaire's eyes opened slightly. It was not a full awakening, but enough to cause the young worker's heart to race. He spoke softly, reassuringly, introducing himself and reminding the patient of where he was. He held the hand gently, feeling the slight squeeze that confirmed recognition. For the first time, the patient seemed to respond to presence rather than routine, and the young worker realized that months of patience, kindness, and attention were finally bridging the gap between unconsciousness and awareness. The staff were astonished. Doctors and nurses who had been skeptical now watched closely, witnessing progress that no machine or medicine alone could explain. The young worker remained humble, focusing entirely on the patient, speaking softly and maintaining the same consistent care that had guided them through months of uncertainty. The family was emotional, tears flowing freely as they saw the first signs of life, the acknowledgement of care, and the recognition of someone who had devoted himself so completely. In the days that followed, progress accelerated slowly but steadily. The patient's eyes opened more fully, hands moved with intention, and facial expressions became more expressive. The young worker continued to narrate stories, play soft music, and maintain gentle touch and presence. Each interaction, each word, each gesture reinforced the connection between them. The patient, though still weak, began to respond, not only physically, but emotionally, recognizing the care that had surrounded him through the long months of unconsciousness. The young worker also noticed the emotional impact on himself and others. He realized that his role had extended beyond simple medical care. It had become a journey of human connection, empathy, and understanding. Staff who had once doubted now approached him with respect, observing the subtle signs of awareness and learning from his methods. The family, too, grew more confident, understanding the importance of calm, consistent presence, and human connection in fostering recovery. One particularly significant moment occurred when the patient squeezed the young worker's hand deliberately while maintaining eye contact. The gesture was small but profound. It communicated recognition, gratitude, and perhaps understanding. The young worker spoke softly, describing what had happened outside the room, sharing stories of hope and kindness and offering reassurance. The patient's subtle responses grew more frequent, each one reinforcing the bridge that had been built through months of consistent care. Evenings remained a time of reflection for the young worker. After completing the day's tasks, he would sit quietly, observing the patient's breathing, movements, and expressions. He whispered stories, sang softly, and maintained a presence that was both attentive and comforting. He understood that healing was not only physical, but emotional and spiritual, and he nurtured both aspects with care and dedication. The connection they shared had become profound, based not on wealth or status but on empathy, patience, and human presence. The family, witnessing these subtle but meaningful changes, grew emotional and grateful. They understood that their loved one's progress was not solely due to medicine or technology, but to the unwavering care of someone who had devoted himself fully to his well-being. The young worker, however, remained humble, never seeking recognition, understanding that his role was simply to provide consistent presence, empathy, and care. As weeks continued, the patient began to respond more clearly. Eyes followed movement, hands grasped gently, and facial expressions conveyed emotions. The young worker spoke softly, describing ordinary events, telling stories of small triumphs and acts of kindness, and maintaining gentle touch. Each interaction reinforced awareness, recognition, and connection. The patient's recovery, though gradual, was undeniable, and the young worker felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that his dedication had made a difference. One morning, a miraculous moment occurred. The patient fully opened his eyes and spoke his first words, weak but clear. The young worker's heart raced, tears filling his eyes. The words expressed gratitude and recognition, acknowledging the care, patience, and presence that had guided him through months of unconsciousness. The family, overwhelmed with emotion, gathered around, witnessing the extraordinary result of human compassion and connection. The young worker remained calm, speaking softly, ensuring that the patient felt supported, safe, and recognized. The following days were filled with cautious optimism. The patient continued to strengthen, both physically and emotionally. The young worker maintained his routines, continuing to provide attentive care, gentle touch, and soft conversation. He also guided the family, showing them how to interact, communicate, and support recovery without overwhelming or causing stress. The atmosphere in the room was transformed, filled with hope, gratitude, and a sense of profound human connection. The miraculous awakening not only impacted the patient but also inspired everyone involved. Staff, family, and even the young worker himself recognized the extraordinary power of consistent, patient care, empathy, and human presence. The experience reinforced the idea that recovery was holistic, influenced not only by medicine but by emotional support, attention, and connection. Every gentle gesture, word spoken with kindness, and moment of attentive presence had contributed to this extraordinary result. The young worker reflected on the journey. Understanding the profound impact of human connection, he realized that his role had extended beyond the physical tasks of care to include emotional support, empathy, and presence. The millionaire, once unresponsive and isolated, now recognized the quiet dedication that had nurtured his recovery. The bond between them was a testament to the transformative power of patience, care, and human compassion. In the quiet moments after the awakening, the young worker continued to sit by the bedside, adjusting blankets, smoothing sheets, and speaking softly. He narrated stories, described ordinary events, and maintained a calm, gentle presence. The patient, now aware and responsive, engaged in small ways, acknowledging the care that had surrounded him. The young worker understood that this connection was fragile, requiring continued patience, consistency, and empathy to nurture fully. The family expressed profound gratitude, recognizing that their loved one's recovery was not solely due to medical expertise, but to the unwavering care, attention, and compassion provided by the young worker. They began to appreciate the quiet, consistent presence that had guided their relative through months of unconsciousness. The young worker, however, remained humble, understanding that his role was simply to provide care, presence, and empathy, allowing the patient's own strength to emerge. As the days continued, the patient's strength grew, both physically and emotionally. He responded more clearly, engaged in conversation, and began to interact with family and staff. The young worker continued his attentive routines, maintaining gentle touch, soft conversation, and a calming presence. Each interaction reinforced recovery, awareness, and connection, creating a foundation for ongoing healing and transformation. The miraculous awakening had a lasting impact on everyone involved. It demonstrated the extraordinary influence of empathy, patience, and human connection in the recovery process. The young medical worker had shown that consistent care, thoughtful attention, and genuine presence could bridge the gap between unconsciousness. After the millionaire fully awakened, life in the hospital room began to change in subtle but powerful ways. The young medical worker, who had dedicated months of patient care, continued to attend to him. But now there was a new dynamic, a sense of recognition, gratitude, and shared understanding. Each day he ensured that the patient's needs were met with the same gentle attention, but there was now a sense of connection that went beyond routine. The patient could respond, smile, and communicate in small ways, and every interaction deepened the bond they had built over months of care. The family, initially anxious and impatient, now watched with awe and relief. They saw their loved one gradually regaining strength and awareness, and they understood that the young worker's dedication had been instrumental in this miraculous recovery. They asked questions, sought advice, and expressed heartfelt gratitude, not for financial gain or reward, but for the human compassion and patience that had guided their relative back to life. The young worker remained humble, knowing that his role was one of service and presence, not recognition. Each morning began with the same gentle routine, but now it included moments of shared conversation. The young worker spoke softly, recounting ordinary events, telling stories, and describing scenes outside the hospital. The patient listened attentively, occasionally commenting or asking questions. These interactions brought joy, comfort, and a sense of normalcy after the long period of unconsciousness. It was as though the months of patience, kindness, and attention had finally blossomed into meaningful communication. As the patient's physical strength returned, he began to engage more actively in his own care. The young worker guided him through simple exercises, taught him to adjust his position safely, and encouraged self-movement to rebuild strength. The patient responded with determination, inspired by the gentle guidance and consistent support he had received. Each small victory, a hand movement, a smile, a word spoken, was celebrated quietly, a testament to the power of patience, persistence, and human connection. The young medical worker also observed the emotional transformation in the patient. Once isolated in unconsciousness, he now displayed emotions, curiosity, and engagement. He laughed softly at stories, showed concern for small matters, and expressed gratitude for the care he had received. These moments reinforced the young worker's belief that human connection, empathy, and consistent attention were as important to recovery as medical intervention. The millionaire, once defined by wealth and status, now seemed more aware of the deeper values of life, recognizing kindness and compassion as priceless gifts. Visitors, including extended family and close friends, were amazed by the progress. They observed the gentle rapport between the young worker and the patient's responsiveness, and the subtle signs of strength returning. Questions arose about how such recovery had been achieved, and the young worker humbly explained the importance of consistent, patient care, attentive presence, and human empathy. The lessons were clear. Recovery is not only physical but emotional and spiritual, influenced by care, patience, and the quality of human interaction. The patient began to reflect on his experience, expressing gratitude in profound ways. He acknowledged that during his unconscious state, he could somehow sense the presence and kindness of the young worker. This recognition was not only verbal but emotional, and it deepened the bond between them. The young worker listened with humility, understanding that this was the natural culmination of months of dedicated care and quiet attention. There were no grand gestures or monetary rewards, only the simple, transformative power of human compassion. As the days continued, the patient became more independent. He could sit up, perform basic tasks, and communicate clearly. The young worker guided him patiently, encouraging confidence and autonomy. Each step of progress was celebrated quietly, reinforcing the sense of achievement and shared effort. The bond between caregiver and patient was no longer one-sided. It had evolved into mutual respect, understanding, and appreciation. The young medical worker also noticed a profound shift in the patient's perspective. The experience of being cared for during a vulnerable time seemed to awaken a deeper understanding of life's priorities. He began to value empathy, kindness, and human connection over material wealth. Conversations between the young worker and the patient often touched on life, gratitude, and the importance of caring for others. These moments were both educational and emotional, shaping the patient's worldview and reinforcing the transformative power of genuine human care. Family and friends continued to express their appreciation, often noting that the young worker had become an integral part of the patient's journey. They understood that his role extended far beyond the physical tasks of care. He had been a source of emotional stability, hope, and compassion. The young worker remained modest, emphasizing that recovery was a collaborative process, and that his presence had been guided by empathy and dedication rather than obligation or recognition. One afternoon, the patient asked to share a meal with the young worker in the hospital room. It was a small but significant gesture, symbolizing respect, gratitude, and the deep human connection that had formed. They talked quietly, laughed softly, and shared stories, creating a moment of normalcy and companionship after months of medical care. The young worker felt a quiet fulfillment, knowing that his consistent presence and gentle care had made such a meaningful impact. The young medical worker also began to reflect on his own growth. He realized that the experience had transformed him as much as it had the patient. He had learned patience, resilience, empathy, and the importance of consistent, attentive presence. The lessons went beyond medicine. They were about life, human connection, and the power of compassion to reach even the most vulnerable individuals. He understood that small, quiet actions could create profound change, sometimes in ways that were invisible to the world but deeply felt by those involved. The patient's recovery continued steadily, with improved mobility, clearer communication, and stronger emotional awareness. He engaged with family, staff, and visitors with gratitude and humility. The young worker guided him gently, offering advice and support without imposing control. This balance of care and respect fostered confidence and independence, allowing the patient to reclaim agency over his life while maintaining the supportive bond that had nurtured his recovery. Over time, the millionaire made decisions that reflected his transformed perspective. He expressed a desire to give back, support causes that promoted human welfare, and recognized the importance of empathy and compassion in daily life. The young worker observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, understanding that his role had contributed not only to physical recovery, but also to personal transformation and a renewed outlook on life. Evenings remained a special time. The young worker would sit with the patient, sharing stories, listening to reflections, and maintaining a calm, nurturing presence. These moments reinforced trust, connection, and emotional stability. The patient's family often joined, and together they shared quiet conversations, laughter, and gratitude. The hospital room, once a space of uncertainty and stillness, had become a place of healing, human connection, and shared understanding. The young worker's humility and dedication inspired those around him. Colleagues began to recognize the importance of emotional care, alongside medical expertise. The patient's family became advocates for patient-centered care, understanding that recovery was influenced by empathy, presence, and consistent attention. The lessons learned in this experience extended beyond the hospital, shaping perspectives on life, care, and the profound impact of human kindness. As the patient prepared for discharge, the young medical worker ensured that he was equipped for continued recovery at home. He provided guidance, advice, and ongoing support, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the routines, exercises, and habits that had fostered healing. The patient expressed heartfelt gratitude, acknowledging that the young worker's patience, empathy, and consistent care had made all the difference. The farewell was quiet but profound, a testament to the transformative power of human connection. After the patient left the hospital, the young medical worker continued his work, carrying the lessons and experiences with him. He understood that his role as a caregiver extended beyond tasks and procedures. It was about presence, empathy, patience, and human connection. The experience had reinforced his dedication, strengthened his skills, and deepened his understanding of the profound